The European Union. Something doesn't feel right. That feels better. Anyway, the European Union. They've amassed the world's second largest economy by GDP and the largest single market across all of their 27 different countries, 18 of them using the world's largest single currency, the euro. But where exactly did this weird institution come from, and how did it lead to what it is today? Well, after researching the timeline from about early 20th century to date, I've gotten a decent picture of how this union came to be, all contained within this notebook. Let's find out what happened. The first real appearance of the idea of European unity began with a book published right about after World War I titled Pan-Europa. Meanwhile, after everybody was trying to recover from the toll on Europe that was the First World War, a strange, angry man with a weird mustache was plotting to kill everybody who wasn't German within a 3,959-mile radius of the Earth, and also maybe take over the world in the process. So everybody was kind of preoccupied with that instead of being friends. Later though, once the angry mustache man and all of his friends had left, people decided it was finally time to become friends again. Europeans were pretty tired of doing nothing but being at war, and wanted something, anything, to help with that kind of cooperation. This is the mindset that led to the creation of the Council of Europe in May 1949. Pretty cool organization if I do say so myself. Though it was mostly focused on human rights, so it didn't do much diplomatically. Now at this point, Germany had been demurderified for quite some time, and the US and UK were wondering if they should take the US claim of Germany, the UK claim of Germany, the French claim of Germany, and put them all together. The French had some grievances with the idea, mainly the fact that they had been the only ally to be completely invaded by Germany, and the idea of that happening again wasn't very favorable. Well, too bad, the other allies said, putting both their claims together into West Germany. France did not like the idea of giving up their claim of Germany, probably for the reason of not being murdered again, and probably for another reason. French coal supplies were low, and the claim they had in Germany kinda sorta maybe had a bunch of coal in it, which would let them make a bunch of steel to make their economy not sad. The French did end up merging their claim with West Germany, but not happily. Work on an economic partnership began in June 1950 to make the European countries a little less broke after World War II. The partnership was designed to be centered around coal and steel. This became known as the European Coal and Steel Community, or ECSC, and came into effect August 1952 between France, West Germany, Belgium, Luxembourg, Italy, and the Netherlands. Now, I don't know if any of you have eyes out there, but if you do have them, then you probably noticed I missed a spot. Well, what goes right there? In 1951, European governments decided that they wanted to start integrating their military power. This became known as the EDC, or the European Defense Community. What's that? European governments, after a world war that killed at least 70 million people, trying to meddle with the very delicate structure of military power? I see absolutely no problem with that. Yeah, no. It shouldn't leave much up to interpretation as to how that was a terrible idea. It was incredibly controversial, and nobody could agree on the specifics of the plan at all. It ended up being thrown out of the French Parliament 319 to 264. That kind of margin just kind of shows how terrible of an idea that was. European integration was pretty bleak at this point, but somehow it would be salvaged. The Messina meeting between all of the ECSC members is commonly credited for being the savior of European integration. Woo! And so it continues. The participating countries decided to shove their economies even further together to make a common market, and to make a governing body for those weird big exploding power buildings that we call nuclear reactors. France was the only country that even had a kind of okay economy at the time, so it makes sense they got by far the most negotiating power. Also, France had a pretty big portion of their economy dedicated to agriculture, meaning that in the final draft of the treaty, agriculture had a really big advantage. What treaty, you say? Well, the Treaty of Rome, to be exact. The 6 ECSC members signed the Treaty of Rome on the 26th of March, 1957. With it, they got a regulation of nuclear energy called Euratom, and the European Economic Community. You can also just call it the European Community if you don't really care about those fancy graphs that track whether a company is cool or not. There is also some competition in the mix. Britain didn't want to join this new European Community thing, but they still wanted in on some kind of economic partnership. They asked Austria, Norway, Denmark, Portugal, Sweden, and Switzerland if they wanted in. This organization of governments became known as the European Free Trade Association. although honestly it didn't really do much and just kind of sat there pretending like it was important. The US thought the EFTA was pretty stupid, so they tried to get the UK to join the EC, which worked actually. The problem is that French President Charles de Gaulle basically auto-rejected their application because he thought the UK had no place in an integrated Europe for whatever reason. Once de Gaulle had left office in 1972, the UK, Norway, Ireland, and Denmark all actually looked into joining the EC. For each country, the EC provided lots of economic benefit, but was pretty controversial among their populations. Once the voting had finished, everybody voted yes for the EC except for Norway, who edged out a 54% vote against the EC. In 1975, Greece had applied to join the European Community. The problem was that their economics were a little on fire, to say the very least. So the European Commission, the legislative branch of the EC, basically just said, go away, you're too poor, but in a more formal sense. Now the rest of the EC saw what the Commission did and did not approve. The rest of the community overruled the Commission and let Greece become a member in January 1981. In 1986, Spain and Portugal became members, so that was nice. Now at around this time, the first major revision to the Treaty of Rome, from back here, was established, the Single European Act, or C. Signed on the 28th of February 1986, this reform to the treaty was sought to dissolve more barriers, political and economic, between the EC members. Soon after the Single European Act was signed, countries were already wanting to dig even more into that sweet, sweet, succulent economic integration juice. Belgium was the first country to say, hey, could we put our economies even closer together? That would be great, thanks, in December 1990. Historically, on the 7th of February 1992, the Maastricht Treaty on European Union was signed, establishing the long-awaited European Union. But there were still two countries that were constitutionally obliged to hold a vote with their people rather than just a parliamentary vote: Denmark and Ireland. Almost 70% of Irish voters gave the treaty the okay, which was great. Now Denmark, let's see your results. Perfect, it passed. What? It didn't pass? That can't be right. No, that's right. It didn't pass. Okay, apparently after looking at the data again, by a margin of 0.7% or 30,000 votes, Denmark voted no for the treaty. Frankly, the European community was kinda shook. They had to quickly scramble to figure out some way to get Danish people on the side of the Maastricht Treaty. Around the same time of the whole Denmark situation, President Francis Mitterrand held a referendum with the French people just to see how supportive they really were of the Maastricht Treaty, even though it already easily passed French Parliament. That was, we'll put it as a less than reasonable decision. Look, what? No, you didn't need to do that. Like, French Parliament already voted yes. You didn't need to put the entire treaty in danger of failing just to show some publicity stunt. No! The results of the referendum almost cost the European community the entire treaty. The treaty scraped by with 1.05% of the French votes. If it had fallen into the no side of the category, the entire treaty would become obsolete because every single country had to sign it. Regardless of all the problems, it ended up going okay. The French still voted yes, and the European community got Denmark to vote for 56.8% in favor of the treaty. So, after a very unexpected bumpy ride, on the 1st of November, 1993, the Maastricht Treaty on European Union came into effect and established the beginning of the European Union. Wow, it's a lot of history. There are clearly plenty of examples of debate and diplomacy throughout this whole timeline. As I said earlier in the video, it's pretty hard to overstate the EU's achievements. The ability to work and travel anywhere as a European citizen in any of the EU countries makes it very appealing to a lot of European minds. But I think the EU has brought something even more important: peace. The Second World War left Europe in shambles, but with the careful planning of all the European institutions over the years, they've amassed over 70 years of peace in Europe. The EU and its many predecessors have created a legacy of peace and partnership in Europe, and for that, I commend the Union. Here's to 70 more years of peace in Europe.